And because I think a lot of times that's where a lot of good ideas are shared in those smaller groups, and we encourage that. That's why that's been kept as a pretty important part of this conference. We're going to have, I guess, a quick relay of speakers here over the next few minutes. We're going to start off with Ben Rosser, who's our new corn specialist with OMAFRA. He's going to talk about going all in, investigating a one-pass full NPK fertility spring till system. This is sponsored by Collins Barrows. Ben started with OMAFRA as a corn industry lead in October 2015. Prior to joining OMAFRA, Ben was a research technician with a former corn industry lead, Greg Stewart, and assisted in the research projects investigating corn nitrogen rates, application methods, starter fertilizers, and the use of precision agriculture technologies. The only thing in that sentence that I might hold against you is the Greg Stewart part, but we'll look past that, Ben. Okay. Ben has a BSc in agronomy, a master's in plant and agriculture from the University of Guelph. Ben is based in the Crop Science Building on the U of G campus. Join me in welcoming Ben.
Well, thanks very much. So I'm just going to kind of summarize a project we had on the go here the past couple years. This project was started by Greg when he was still corn specialist, but we've continued on with it, and it was supported by innovative farmers. So, you know, strip tillage research isn't new to Ontario. There was a fair bit of work that was done back in the 90s and kind of early 2000s. And, you know, it kind of showed that strip tillage kind of brought a middle ground between conventional till and no-till. Maybe on your lighter textured soils there wasn't as much of a benefit, but on more of your medium textured soils, it would start to, you know, bring a yield benefit to relative to no-till. You know, kind of a compromise between the two systems, that if there was a yield lag, you could still get a fair bit of that back by going to strip tillage. You know, still only tilling about maybe 30% of the field, leaving the rest uncovered. You know, still residue cover and untouched soil from a conservation perspective. Despite that, there still wasn't a lot of uptake with strip tillage. So the idea of this project was to try to combine it in a one simple, easy, single pass system in the spring, to try to come over some of the hurdles you might face trying to go from conventional tillage towards a strip tillage system. So, you know, there's maybe a couple downsides of trying to go from conventional tillage to strip tillage. One being nitrogen. If you're a conventional guy and you're putting all your nitrogen on up front, you might have to become a side dresser now, which maybe doesn't excite you a whole lot. Another benefit, or another downfall being GPS guidance. Back when a lot of this original research was done in the 90s, you know, GPS guidance wasn't nearly as prolific on farms as it is nowadays. There was some research in the States at the time that showed really to get the maximum yield benefit out of a strip tillage system, you really have to stay on those strips. So, you know, nowadays GPS is a lot more prevalent out in the countryside, so that's one more thing that we can hopefully overcome. Another is P&K management. You know, there's options in a strip tillage system, you know, keeping a card on, putting P&K in those strips. But I guess maybe there's still some management questions that still have to be answered in regards to that. And the last being strip tillage equipment. So a lot of the work that was originally done in the 90s tended to be more heavier shank type machines in the fall that maybe didn't lend themselves to making a good strip in the spring. There's new equipment out nowadays that maybe does a better job. So from a one-pass spring perspective, maybe we have options now that weren't available before. So the technologies we wanted to look at and try to incorporate into a one-pass tillage system are RTK auto guidance on the tractor as well as a planter for stripping and planting. A more modern type strip tiller that's available now that wasn't available before. And if we're thinking about putting all of our fertilizer down in one pass in the spring, all of our nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, naturally if we use conventional nitrogen sources such as urea, it's probably going to make you pretty nervous to put a season's worth of urea in that little strip. So we have products now like ESN, which is a polymer-coated urea. It's going to slow the release of nitrogen as it has to dissolve out of those granules and is going to hold that nitrogen back, maybe keep a little safer system to plant seed in the next year. So there's a couple key questions that we want to answer as part of this project. First one is P&K placement. There's concerns that, you know, putting P&K on with a strip tiller maybe won't equal the yields of P&K on the planter. Some of the earlier research done in Ontario, putting P&K down with a shank in the fall, suggested that you still had to come back with P&K in the planter. if we're coming in with a spring strip till system, especially in a coulter type system where we're mixing the P and K in that strip instead of putting it in a concentrated zone, does that still apply? Next one is ESN versus urea. So I already touched on that a bit. What does ESN bring from a safety perspective that you wouldn't get from urea? Next one is ESN versus side dressing. Is ESN still as safe as a relatively safe method like side dressing UAN? And those are the three questions that we wanted to answer. So this is just a quick overview of our rig. We're a 6-row Don Pluribus coulter strip till unit in the spring, just mounted on a caddy, 3-point hitch on the back. We have a Gandy airbox on the back for putting our fertilizer blend through, and we have a tractor with RTK auto guidance. Typically coming in on fields with less residue, soybeans or wheat stubble that's been baled, and typically coming in on soils that are going to lend themselves more to spring strip tillage, sandy, loamy type soils, not as much in the clay or clay loam type soils, and typically on soils that were low to moderate response for P and K. So our fertilizer blends included a 1919 blend that we either put through the planter on bare strips or put through the strip tiller as we were making the strips. The planter, we would come back onto bare strips. That would give us our comparison between P and K fertilizer on the planter or through the strip tiller. We also included, in the balance of nitrogen on those treatments, we came back and side dressed as UAN. The next treatments we looked at was the all-in NP and K all in the strip, and that was either a urea blend, which the balance of nitrogen was supplied as urea in that fertilizer blend, or an ESN blend where 50% of the nitrogen was supplied as ESN and 50% of the nitrogen was supplied as urea. And so those were all going down at 135 pounds of N, 30 pounds of P, 30 pounds of K. We also ratcheted it up a little more in case that's not enough for your system. Is this still viable if you're putting 160 pounds of nitrogen down? So these are the results for our planter versus strip tiller. We have planter yields in the third column, strip tiller yields in the next column in response. Typically, we didn't see a big difference for moving fertilizer off the planter and putting it onto the strip tiller. A couple sites was a little bit higher, generally not significant yields. So it appeared in this system there wasn't a big hit for moving fertilizer off of the planter and putting it onto the strip tiller, which is different from previous results in Ontario and more shank type placement strategies. When we looked at ESN versus urea, we saw that there was a yield hit for the urea relative to ESN, ranged from 17, 19 bushels. In this case, they weren't significant either, but I think if we'd done a bit of a different analysis where we combined all the plots and fields in one analysis, we maybe could have teased out a little bit more. Still kind of hard to ignore a 17 and 19 bushel yield difference. So I think the urea certainly stung things relative to where we had the ESN blend. Last is the results for our side dress and ESN. Again, the ESN blend didn't yield any less than any of the side dress treatments, suggesting at these fields in 2014 data here that it was no more dangerous to put those ESN blends than it would have been to come back and side dress. So there was a bit of an issue in 2015, and that some of our fields for our ESN urea treatments looked like this, where we had 3 good rows on the left-hand side and 3 poor rows where population was significantly reduced on the right-hand side. When we dig on the plants, the plants look fairly normal on the left-hand side. Right-hand side, they were stunted. Some of the ones did come up. Typically, the roots were all burned off. Fairly typical fertilizer burn injury. Blackened roots, burned off tips, or no roots at all. And some seeds didn't germinate at all. So when we look at our differences between 2014 and 2015, one major difference was precipitation. Most of our locations didn't get any rain after strip tilling or planting in 2015. From the beginning of May till about the end of May, so that was maybe part at play. Another one was we changed a bit of our application strategy. So this is the back end of the row unit on our Don Pluribus. In 2014, we were mixing all of our fertilizer, 3 tubes off of the Gandy, into the zone where it's being mixed by the coulters. In 2015, we put these sideband tubes on. So they're mounted on the outside of the coulters that are doing the tillage, and it's one of the 3 hoses coming down. Kind of the idea is it's going to tuck that fertilizer kind of in the bottom corner of your strip that you're making. And especially from a high nitrogen perspective, it didn't seem like a bad idea. We're going to keep it away from where we're planting the seed. From a safety perspective, maybe that's a good idea. But what we found was when we actually went and dug up our fertilizer strips, those fertilizer on the sideband tubes is actually ending up about the same levels where we're planting our seed. And I think our issue was that these tubes always matter on the inside of the row units where those red hash marks are on this image. And I think if you get a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right of where those zones went down, on one half of the planter, you're getting further away from those hot bands. On the other half of the planter, you're moving the row units closer towards those hot bands, which is likely why we saw the 3 rows that were okay and the 3 rows that were injured. This is just a little quick case study, yields at Elora. We looked at yields on the good strips relative to triple 19, which is in the brown column, ESN in the green columns, and urea in the white columns. So these were the good rows. In the good rows, we didn't have a yield hit for this system, but when we looked at yields in the bad rows where populations were significantly reduced, there was a fairly significant yield hit. And again, populations were reduced. In the ESN treatments, maybe not quite as much, but in the ureas down towards 50% of the good rows. So we're talking 30 to 40 bushel hits on the ESN, as much as 60 bushels on the urea treatment. So clearly some risk involved in this type of system. So challenges, fertilizer injury for sure in 2015. Maybe the mixing's a better idea than having any fertilizer applied in a band. We didn't have a good side-by-side within the same year to actually make that comparison, but going forwards is my thing we want to address. Also, can we maybe increase the ESN percentage to make it a little bit safer without holding too much nitrogen back for the corn? And then also, how much of this is a dry year effect. So that's kind of the whole project in a nutshell. Just wanted to thank Don and Delta for providing the strip tiller to us for 2 years, Innovative Farmers for helping support the project, Agriculture Adaptation Council, as well as Grain Farmers of Ontario for financial support as well. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email. There's a poster outside as well if you want to get a second look at this data or take a picture. It's just outside these doors. Thanks very much.